The student disappeared on her way to the dormitory, and at first the police thought that the solution was right in front of them. However, with each passing day of the investigation, they became more convinced that there were many tangled moments in this case, and it was only by chance, in the end, that the truth was uncovered. Amy Blount was born on October 1st, 1969, in Homestead, Florida. She grew up in a loving family and had many friends, largely due to her cheerful and kind nature. When she was 14 years old, her father passed away. Despite this painful loss, Amy found the strength to maintain a positive outlook on life. After high school, she enrolled at Flagler College, located in St. Augustine, near Jacksonville. Although it was home to only 13,000 people, it was the oldest city in the USA. It was founded by Spanish explorers, so many architectural elements still differ dramatically from the familiar American things. Amy loved studying at college, and in 3 years, she made many friends there. By that time, she was 21 years old and had only a little left before graduation. On November 6, 1990, her friend Kim came to St. Augustine, and they decided to go to a local bar popular among students. Amy's roommate and best friend, Kelly, also went with them. The young women had a great time enjoying the long-awaited meeting. At some point, their mutual acquaintance, Sean Nolan, joined them. He and Amy had mutual sympathy, but they were not in a relationship. In the evening, Kelly said that she felt sick and went back to the dorm, and a little later, Kim also left, leaving Sean and Amy alone. The next morning, the young women had to go to classes. However, when Kelly woke up, she found that Amy's bedroom door was wide open. She was not there. It seemed strange to her, but she decided that she would see Amy in class. However, the young woman never showed up. Kelly and Kim were worried about her absence and decided to talk to Sean, who stayed with her at the bar the night before. The guy worked at a place near the college, and the young women went to see him. His story seemed strange to them at first. He said that he had had a strong hangover and it was difficult for him to remember the chronology of that night. After gathering his thoughts, he finally told them that after the bar, he and Amy went towards the beach to take a walk, but soon they decided to go home. The guy called a taxi from the nearest payphone, and while they were waiting for the car, he and Amy had an argument. In the end, she went on foot to the dorm, which was only a few minutes away. Kelly was upset that the guy left Amy alone and didn't walk her to her dorm. At the same time, she became even more worried. Amy had nowhere else to go but the dorm, but she never showed up in her room. Her friend was afraid that something bad had happened to her and began to seriously suspect Sean. His strange behavior only heightened her anxiety. It seemed like the guy was not at all worried that Amy had disappeared. Kelly decided to continue her search and went to the university campus, asking all her acquaintances if they had seen Amy. The answer was the same. No one had met her that day, and no one knew where she could be. At around 6 p.m., her friend decided to call the police. She informed investigators about the young woman's disappearance, and they began to check the information. They called all local hospitals, but no one resembling Amy had been admitted. The taxi operators were also contacted, but none of the drivers had picked up the young woman. That night, the police could not find any evidence that Amy had been in trouble or become a victim of a crime. Moreover, at the time, the young woman was already 21 years old, so they did not officially declare her missing, despite her friend's requests. By that time, Kelly was 100% sure that something bad had happened to Amy. Realizing that she could not convince the police to start searching, she decided to call Amy's mother. Later, the young woman admitted that it was the hardest call of her life. The next morning, Amy's sister arrived in St. Augustine to participate in the search. The first thing they did was go to the police station, where they received the same response. They couldn't start an investigation because there was no indication of a threat to life. The investigators believed that the young woman had simply left for a couple of days without warning. So the sisters, along with Kelly and other friends of the missing young woman, decided to organize their own search operation. They printed flyers with information about Amy and began posting them all over the city. Soon, a local television channel came to their aid, spreading information about the young woman's disappearance. All of this led to a large number of volunteers offering to participate in the search. They split into groups and began combing both the city and the surrounding area. Volunteers searched forests, beaches, abandoned houses, but they were unable to find any clues. This continued for 3 days until the police finally decided to start an investigation. By that time, the whole town was talking about Amy's disappearance, apparently putting pressure on the local police department and forcing them to take action. The first thing they decided to do was to talk to Sean, as he was the last person to see Amy, and here they encountered the first suspicious moment. The guy told them a story that was different from the one Kelly and Kim heard. Sean said that he and Amy left the bar and headed towards the beach, but on the way, they decided to split up and go home. He approached the payphone and called a taxi, but when he turned around, Amy was nowhere to be seen. After waiting for some time, he got in the taxi and went home. Investigators found this story strange. How could a young woman disappear from the street in a matter of seconds, and Sean, who was standing a meter away from her, not notice? Moreover, why did he give his friends a different version of events? All of this was enough to start considering Sean as a suspect. Detectives decided to verify his story and find the taxi driver who was supposed to take him home that night, and soon they succeeded. The only problem was that his story also differed from the two versions told by Sean. The driver claimed that he did indeed pick up the young man near the phone booth. However, when he arrived at the location, Sean was sleeping on a bench and the taxi driver had to wake him up. There was no young woman present at the time. On one hand, this provided the boy with an alibi, but on the other hand, he had, for some reason, shared his version of what had happened, which only raised suspicion with the detectives. Despite this, there was no evidence against him, so the police continued to search for new leads. 10 days had passed since Amy's disappearance. During that time, there had been no activity on her bank accounts, which only confirmed that she had not left on her own initiative. By that time, the residents of St. Augustine and the police began to suspect that Amy's disappearance might be related to another series of gruesome crimes, which we have a separate video about. In August of the same year, an unknown maniac killed 5 students in the city of Gainesville, which was 120 kilometers away. People began to fear that this criminal had moved to their town and that they were all in mortal danger. Investigators contacted colleagues from Gainesville and began to compare the cases, but soon they realized that there were many inconsistencies. The Gainesville killer attacked students in their homes and left their bodies there. In Amy's case, the police didn't even know if she was still alive and what had happened to her. Furthermore, at the time of her disappearance, the police had already arrested a man who was highly likely to be the killer. Several serious pieces of evidence pointed to him. Therefore, soon the detectives stopped looking for a connection between that series of crimes and Amy's disappearance. Meanwhile, the police department offered a reward of $10,000 for any information that would help find Amy. They immediately received hundreds of tips, but most of them led nowhere. This happens in any case where authorities offer money for information. People come up with various stories, hoping to get an easy check. It was also about 6 potentially important leads. Witnesses reported seeing her in different parts of the city. Many of them added that she got into some cars. Out of all this, one call was much more interesting. A man reported seeing Amy in the city center on the night of her disappearance. A fairly old car, similar to a Chevrolet Camaro, pulled up to her. There were 2 men inside. After a brief conversation with them, Amy got into the passenger seat and they drove off. At that time, this was the most detailed lead in the hands of detectives. However, something in the witness's behavior made them suspicious. After the call, he agreed to come to the station, answered all the questions, and tried to help. But for some reason, the investigators treated him with suspicion. Detectives called it a police instinct and couldn't explain their doubts. They offered him to take a lie detector test to verify his testimony, and the man agreed. They asked him only 2 questions: whether he had anything to do with Amy's disappearance and whether he could take detectives to her. The witness answered negatively, and the polygraph operator did not detect any signs of lying. Thus, investigators understood that they finally had honest testimony that could help find Amy. The police began searching for all cars that fit the witness's description, establishing the identities of the drivers and checking their alibis for the night of the young woman's disappearance. All of this continued for several weeks, but the detective never managed to find a single potential suspect. Since then, there have been no leads in this case, but on January 1st, 2 months after Amy's disappearance, a disturbing call was made to the police. A man was walking his dog on the outskirts of St. Augustine. At some point, his dog noticed a pile of logs with bricks and started acting strangely, barking and pulling on the leash, trying to run there. The owner decided to see what had so upset his dog and was almost speechless when he saw a skeleton hand sticking out from under the pile. He immediately called the police, and investigators began to extract the body. Due to the high degree of decomposition, they were unable to quickly establish her identity, but one detail immediately caught their attention. The body was wearing a green shirt, just like Amy Blount on the night she disappeared. The body was wrapped in a sheet. Medical experts conducted a more detailed analysis and concluded that the deceased was a young woman. She had received 5 sharp object wounds, indicated by cuts on her shirt. In addition, 2 serious abrasions were found on the body. Investigators suspected that the victim was Amy, so they immediately sent her dental records to experts, who soon confirmed that it was indeed her. Friends and relatives of the young woman were devastated by the news. They had hoped until the very end that Amy would return to them unharmed. Now the police had to investigate her murder. Along with the discovery of the body, they received their first lead. Amy had been partially buried and covered with logs on the outskirts of a large private property. Upon learning the name of the owner of this plot, they called him in for questioning. For understandable reasons, the man immediately became a suspect. However, after talking to him, the investigators began to doubt his involvement. First, it was a huge plot of land without a fence, and anyone could enter it. Secondly, there were 2 residential trailers on the property whose owners paid the landowner for rent. He added that he constantly had problems with one of the tenants. When they heard his name, the police were shocked. It was the same witness who had been polygraphed. The man was 22-year-old Timothy Getchell. The police immediately asked the trailer owner to let them search the residence while the man was not at home, and he agreed. The first thing the police saw was a sheet very similar to the one in which Amy's body was wrapped. Upon further search, they found long female hair stuck in the mechanism of a floor exercise machine. It was the same color as Amy's hair. In addition, using special chemicals, forensic experts discovered blood traces in the living room, a sheet of paper with the name Toby and a phone number was also found in the house. The landowner said that a guy with that name did often visit Timothy. The police allowed that this person might also be related to the murder and contacted him. Toby agreed to meet with the detectives and told them his story. According to Toby's words, on the night of Amy's disappearance, he and Timothy were driving around town, stopping at different bars. At some point, they saw Amy walking alone on the street. Timothy asked Toby to stop the car, got out, and approached the young woman. He invited her to join them, and she got into the car. Together, they went to Timothy's trailer and had a party. However, Toby's story started to sound strange, like a detective story. At first, he claimed that he just dropped off Amy and Timothy near the trailer and immediately left. Then he changed his version and said that he went inside with them, had a beer, then went to the bathroom and left immediately without going into the living room, and got into the car and left. Investigators doubted that he was completely honest with them. They didn't believe that Amy would go to the outskirts of the city with two unknown men at night. In the morning, she had to go to classes and was supposed to go to the dormitory right after the bar. It looked like Toby constructed his story in such a way that he couldn't be made an accomplice. Detectives did not rule out that Timothy and Toby might have actually abducted the young woman on the empty night street, but could not prove it yet. Moreover, Toby told something else. According to him, in the first week of the investigation, he saw flyers about Amy's disappearance and recognized her. Then he asked Timothy what happened that night. He claimed that he took the young woman to the city center and dropped her off there. After that, she approached another car and soon got into it. Toby told him that he should share this information with the police. Despite the fact that his story raised serious doubts, the police had enough evidence to arrest Timothy. They arrived at his house and the man came out with his hands raised. During the interrogation, he told the investigators the same story. When Toby left, he began to flirt with Amy, but she rejected him. Then he got angry and decided to take her back to the city. Considering that he did not have his own car, he took the owner of the land's pickup truck and drove her to the center, where Amy allegedly got into another car. But the detectives immediately realized that this was a lie. At that point, they already knew that the rental pickup truck had 3 flat and worn-out tires for many months. The investigators immediately told him about it, and Timothy became nervous. The detectives asked him, "Did you kill Amy?" And the man replied, "I don't know. It seems so." From that moment on, he began to talk about the events of that night. According to him, he didn't remember much of what happened. At some point, he tried to kiss Amy, and the next thing he remembers is her holding a knife. He allegedly got scared that she might attack him, so he tried to take the weapon away from her. After that, Timothy didn't remember anything, as if he had lost consciousness. According to him, this had happened to him before. He had completely lost some memories. When he came to, he found the knife in his hand and Amy lying on the floor, showing no signs of life. Scared, he decided to get rid of the body. Timothy went to the shed for the shovel and started digging a hole. He then wrapped Amy in a sheet and buried her there, covering the grave with logs and bricks. After that, he prayed to God and went to clean up the blood in the room. With his confession in hand, Timothy was charged with murder. No evidence was found against Toby, so he was only used as a witness. On July 15, 1991, a trial was held where the man planned to defend himself and receive a lesser punishment. He wanted to make it look like self-defense and use the story of memory loss. However, everything changed when the prosecutor addressed the judge and requested the death penalty. Almost immediately after that, Timothy stood up and said he was ready to confess to first-degree murder if the prosecution would drop the death penalty in favor of life imprisonment. After some brief consideration, The court agreed to these conditions, and Timothy was sentenced to life in prison. Amy's relatives and friends supported this decision. They all harbored hatred toward the person who took her away from them and wanted him to spend the rest of his life in a prison cell. As for Toby, no charges were ever brought against him. Nevertheless, his story still seems suspicious, and I wouldn't rule out the possibility that he was directly involved in the murder. Timothy remains behind bars to this day. He is currently 53 years old. Share your opinion on this story in the comments. Don't forget to give it a like if you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.